Bringing my newborn son home with my wife began our perfect family dream, a beautiful facade I yearned to make our genuine reality. The key turning in the lock of 124 Willow Lane had never sounded so loud. It was a heavy, definitive click, the sound of a new chapter beginning. I remember that moment with perfect, painful clarity. I was 32 years old, holding a brand new car seat in my hands, and inside it, nestled in a blue blanket, was my son. My son, Leo. My wife, Jessica, who was 30, stood beside me, her smile a little tired from the hospital but glowing. This was it. This was the picture we'd been painting for years. The successful young couple, the beautiful home we'd bought together on a quiet suburban street, and now the final perfect piece, our child. I carried him over the threshold. It felt ceremonial. I'd seen it in movies, but the weight of it, the reality of this tiny, fragile life now depending on us, on me, was staggering. The house smelled like fresh paint and baby powder. Jessica's mom had come by and done what she called a nesting deep clean. Everything was pristine. The new bassinet was in the living room, the mobile of little felt planets hanging perfectly still above it. For a moment, just a single solitary moment, everything was exactly as it should be. I looked at Jessica, her eyes shimmering with what I thought were tears of joy, and I felt a surge of pride and love so powerful it almost buckled my knees. We had done it. We had built this life, this family, brick by brick. In the days that followed, we played our parts to perfection. Our phones buzzed constantly with messages of congratulations. The doorbell rang with deliveries of flowers, gift baskets, and those impossibly tiny outfits that babies outgrow in a week. We posted the photos online, of course. Me holding Leo against my chest, his little head tucked under my chin. Jessica looking angelic as she rocked him to sleep. The three of us, a perfect little unit, beaming for the camera. Our friends and family ate it up. "You guys were made for this," one comment read. "The perfect family," said another, and I believed it. I wanted to believe it so desperately. I dove headfirst into being a father. I learned to change a diaper in under 30 seconds, even in the dark. I mastered the art of warming a bottle to the exact right temperature. I learned the specific way to burp Leo that wouldn't make him spit up on my last clean shirt. I would sit for hours in the rocking chair, just watching him breathe, marveling at his tiny fingers and the way his brow would furrow in his sleep. This was my legacy. This was my blood. This little boy was a part of me, the next link in the Peterson chain. I felt a sense of purpose I'd never known before. But even in those early sleep-deprived days, there was something off. It was like a single note in a beautiful symphony that was just slightly out of tune. At first, I dismissed it as new parent anxiety. I was tired, we were both stressed, and our entire world had just been turned upside down. It was normal to feel a little unmoored. The inconsistencies were small, almost too small to notice, like tiny cracks in a foundation that you only see if you're looking for them. Jessica would tell me a story about her day, about a conversation with her mom or a friend, and a detail would be slightly different later. She'd say the pediatrician told her to try a new formula, but when I'd ask a follow-up question, she'd get defensive and say I must have misheard her. I'd find her texting on her phone, and she'd quickly flip it over the second I walked into the room. When I'd ask who she was talking to, the answer was always a vague, "Oh, just my sister," or "just a group chat." She started taking late-night walks, saying she needed to clear her head. She'd be gone for an hour, sometimes longer, leaving me alone with a fussy baby. She said the fresh air helped, but it felt strange. It felt like she was running away from something, or someone. I tried to talk to her about it once. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding. I told her I felt like there was a distance between us, something unspoken hanging in the air. She just laughed it off. She told me I was exhausted, that I was reading too much into things. She cupped my face in her hands and said, "Landon, we just had a baby. Our life is perfect. Don't go looking for problems where there aren't any." She was so convincing, so reassuring that I let it go. I told myself she was right. I was just a tired, paranoid new dad. But the feeling didn't go away. It lingered. And it was made 1,000 times worse by our neighbor, Mark Jennings. Mark lived in the house directly across the street. He was 33, a few years older than us, and worked from home doing something with software. He'd always been friendly in that generic, neighborly way. A wave when you get the mail, a quick chat about the weather when you're taking out the trash. But after Leo was born, his friendliness went into overdrive. It became intense. He was always there, always. The day we brought Leo home from the hospital, Mark was on his porch within minutes holding a lasagna. Figured you two wouldn't have time to cook, he'd said with a big toothy grin. It was a nice gesture, and we thanked him. But then he did it again a few days later with a shepherd's pie. Then he started just showing up. He'd see me struggling with the stroller on the front steps and would rush over to help, his hands lingering near Jessica's as he adjusted a strap. He'd pop over with our mail if it was accidentally delivered to his house, and then stay for 20 minutes making small talk while his eyes darted around our living room. He seemed to have a sixth sense for when Jessica was alone with the baby. I'd come home from a quick run to the grocery store to find him on our porch talking to her through the screen door. The excuse was always flimsy. Just wanted to see if you needed me to grab anything from the store. Or, thought I heard the baby crying, wanted to make sure everything was okay. He started offering advice. Unsolicited advice. You know, my sister said that brand of diapers gives her kids a rash? He'd comment, peering over my shoulder as I changed Leo. Are you sure you're holding him right? You gotta support the head a little more, buddy. He called me buddy and pal constantly, a forced familiarity that made my skin crawl. The worst part was his interactions with Leo. He'd coo at him and talk in a baby voice that was deeply unsettling coming from a grown man we barely knew. Who's a handsome little guy you are, yes you are, he'd say, leaning way too close to the bassinet. He'd reach out to touch Leo's cheek, and I'd have to physically step in the way, making an excuse about it being nap time. He acted less like a friendly neighbor and more like family. Like he had some kind of right to be there, to be involved in these intimate early days of our son's life. Jessica, for her part, seemed oblivious. Or worse, she seemed to welcome it. Oh, that's just Mark, she'd say with a wave of her hand when I'd mention how often he was around. He's just trying to be nice. It's sweet. She'd laugh at his dumb jokes. She'd thank him profusely for his help. She never once told him to give us some space. She never once seemed to notice the way his gaze would linger on her for a second too long, or the way he always seemed to find a reason to stand a little too close. I felt like I was going crazy. I was living in this picture-perfect house at 124 Willow Lane with my beautiful wife and my newborn son, and on the surface, everything was wonderful. Our friends and family saw us as the pinnacle of happiness, but beneath the surface, a cold, dark current of doubt was starting to flow. The little inconsistencies in Jessica's stories, her secretive behavior with her phone, her late-night escapes, and Mark, always Mark, the overly familiar neighbor who was acting more and more like the man of the house every single day. I was trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside, but on the inside, I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own home. And I had no idea that the casual, offhand comment that would shatter it all was just around the corner. The breaking point didn't come like a thunderclap. It was quieter, more insidious. It arrived on a Saturday afternoon exactly 2 weeks after Leo was born, carried into my home on a wave of cheap perfume and unsolicited advice. Jessica's Aunt Carol had decided to grace us with her presence. She was one of those relatives who spoke in exclamation points and believed her opinions were gifts to be bestowed upon the less enlightened, which in her view was everyone. The house was a wreck. Diaper boxes half empty, mugs of cold coffee, and piles of baby clothes were everywhere. I was 32 years old and I'd never felt so exhausted in my entire life. I was running on fumes, a zombie shuffling through the motions of parenthood. Jessica, who was 30, seemed to be handling it better, or at least she was better at hiding the strain. She was sitting on the couch bouncing a fussy Leo on her knee, while Aunt Carol held court for my favorite armchair. I was trying to be a good host, nodding along as she detailed the 5 ways we were probably ruining our son's future sleep schedule. I was just about to offer her another cup of tea, mostly as an excuse to escape to the kitchen for a few seconds of silence, when she leaned forward, squinting at Leo. You know, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial yet booming whisper. It's funny, I keep looking at him and I just can't get over it. Jessica smiled, a tired but proud mother's smile. Get over what, Aunt Carol? His eyes, she declared, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my son. He doesn't have your eyes, Jessica. And he certainly doesn't have yours, Landon. They're a lovely shade of blue, but they're not a Peterson blue. She paused for dramatic effect, letting the observation hang in the air. Then she snapped her fingers. I know who he looks like. It's that nice neighbor of yours, Mark, the one who brought over the lasagna. He has Mark's exact eyes. Isn't that the darndest thing? She laughed, a loud braying laugh that filled the room. Jessica's smile tightened at the edges, but she laughed along a high, brittle sound. "Oh, Aunt Carol, don't be silly. Babies look like everybody and nobody." But I wasn't laughing. I wasn't even breathing. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, like the sound of her words had created a vacuum. In that single horrifying moment, every vague suspicion, every fleeting doubt, every red flag I had subconsciously ignored all rushed to the forefront of my mind and snapped together into a single cohesive, soul-crushing image. Mark's eyes. I'd seen them every day. I'd seen them peering into my son's bassinet. I'd seen them looking at my wife. And now I could see them staring back at me from the face of the baby I thought was my own. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a blueprint. The specific shade of deep-set blue, the shape, the way they crinkled just so at the corners. It was a detail I'd noticed on Mark, but had never ever wanted to connect to Leo. Until now. Aunt Carol hadn't planted a seed of doubt. She had poured gasoline on a seed that was already there, and in that instant it erupted into a raging inferno. The rest of her visit was a blur. I remember making excuses, mumbling something about needing to check the mail, and escaping to the back porch. I stood there gripping the railing, my knuckles white, just breathing. In, out, trying to stop the world from spinning off its axis. My mind was a frantic slideshow of the past year. Every interaction, every conversation, every weird moment replayed itself, but now it was all cast in a sickening new light. Mark, the 33-year-old neighbor, always being there. Not just friendly, present, intrusively present. Jessica's stories that never quite added up. The girls' nights that ended with her phone being turned off. The sudden intense need for privacy and space in the months leading up to her getting pregnant. And the timeline. Oh God, the timeline. It had always felt off. We'd been trying for a baby for a while, and then suddenly Jessica announced she was pregnant. She said it must have happened the night I got back from that week-long business conference in Chicago. That was 42 weeks ago. I remembered that week vividly. I was stressed, exhausted from the trip, and we had a stupid argument the night I got home. Things were tense between us. It didn't feel like a night where a miracle conception would happen, but I wanted a baby so badly. I wanted to be a father. So I let myself believe it. I pushed down the tiny, nagging voice that said the math felt convenient, forced. Now that voice was screaming, what if she wasn't pregnant from that night? What if it had happened while I was in Chicago, while I was working 14-hour days, eating lonely room service dinners, and thinking about my wife back home? Who was back home? Mark Jennings. Always Mark, just a few dozen feet away, right across the lawn. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to bend over, resting my hands on my knees. I was going to be sick. The betrayal was a physical thing, a poison spreading through my veins. Every happy memory of the pregnancy was now tainted. The first time we heard the heartbeat, the ultrasound pictures I carried in my wallet, the hours I spent painting the nursery, picking out the perfect shade of yellow. The nights I'd talk to Jessica's belly, telling my son all the things we were going to do together. It was all a lie, a performance, and I was the only one in the audience who didn't know the script. By the time Aunt Carol finally left, a cold, hard resolve had settled deep in my bones. The panic and the nausea had subsided, replaced by an icy clarity. I couldn't live with this uncertainty. I couldn't spend the rest of my life looking at this beautiful baby boy and seeing my neighbor's face. I couldn't look at my wife without seeing a stranger. I needed the truth. Not just a suspicion, not just a gut feeling. I needed proof, hard, undeniable, scientific proof. That night, I waited until Jessica and Leo were sound asleep. Her breathing was deep, and even the picture of innocence. Leo was making tiny, soft noises in his bassinet next to our bed. The domestic tranquility of it all felt like a cruel joke. I slipped out of bed, took my laptop into the living room, and closed the door. I didn't just search for home DNA tests. I knew better. A simple over-the-counter test was for curiosity. It wouldn't hold up. It wouldn't give me the power I needed. If my worst fears were true, this wasn't going to end with a quiet conversation. This was going to be a war, and I needed ammunition. I needed something that would be admissible in court, something that could sever a legal tie as cleanly as a surgeon's scalpel. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in phrases like legally admissible paternity test and court-approved DNA. That's when I found it. A company called Veritas Legal Diagnostics. Veritas, the Latin word for truth. It felt like a sign. Their website was professional, No nonsense. It wasn't about happy families finding their roots. It was about providing evidence. They specialized in results that were notarized chain of custody, documented and recognized by the family court system. My heart was pounding against my ribs. My hand trembled as I moved the mouse cursor over the Order Now button. This was it. This was the point of no return. The moment I clicked this button, I was admitting that my marriage, my family, my entire life as I knew it, was potentially a fraud. I was taking the first step off a cliff with no idea what was at the bottom. For a second, I hesitated. A part of me, the part that still loved the woman sleeping in the next room, the part that desperately wanted to be Leo's father, screamed at me to stop, to close the laptop, go back to bed, and pretend Aunt Carol's comment never happened, to live in blissful ignorance. But I couldn't. The poison was already in the well. I couldn't unhear what she'd said. I couldn't unsee the resemblance. I couldn't unfeel the cold, sickening certainty that had taken root in my gut. Living a lie is a prison of its own. I chose the truth no matter how ugly. I took a deep breath and I clicked the button. I entered my credit card information, paying for expedited shipping. The confirmation email hit my inbox a few seconds later. Your Veritas Legal Diagnostics paternity test kit is on its way. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had set the wheels in motion. The truth was now in the mail on its way to 124 Willow Lane, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. The week that followed was the longest of my life. Every time the doorbell rang, my heart leaped into my throat. Every time I saw a delivery truck on our street, I'd have to fight the urge to run outside. I was a nervous wreck, a man living on a knife's edge, and I had to hide it all behind a smile for my wife, for Jessica. The kit arrived 4 days later in a plain, discreet cardboard box. There was no company logo, no indication of the life-altering contents within. It felt heavier than it should have. I hid it in the back of my closet, tucked away in an old shoebox behind my winter boots. Just knowing it was in the house felt like I was harboring a bomb. Now I just needed an opportunity, a window of time alone with Leo where I could perform this quiet, devastating act. It came 1 week after the kit arrived, exactly 5 weeks before what I would later call the reveal. Jessica announced she was going out for a girls' lunch and some shopping, a break she desperately needed, she said. I agreed enthusiastically, maybe a little too enthusiastically. I told her to take her time to enjoy herself. As I watched her back out of the driveway at 124 Willow Lane, a wave of guilt washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by grim determination. The house was silent except for the soft gurgling sounds coming from Leo in his swing. I walked over to him, my hands shaking. He was so small, so perfect. He looked up at me with those wide, innocent eyes, and for a moment I almost lost my nerve. This felt like a betrayal of him, too. But the alternative, living a lie, potentially raising another man's son as my own without knowing, was a far greater betrayal. I went to my closet and retrieved the box. Inside the kit from Veritas Legal Diagnostics was sterile and clinical. Instructions, sealed swabs, collection vials with barcodes, and a chain of custody form that had to be signed and dated. This wasn't a game. I laid everything out on the kitchen counter. I followed the instructions to the letter. First, my sample. I scraped the rough end of the swab against the inside of my cheek for the required 30 seconds. The taste was chalky and unpleasant. I sealed it in its vial, labeled it alleged father, and signed the form. My signature looked shaky. Then came the hardest part. I went back to Leo. He drifted off to sleep. His little mouth was slightly open. My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. I gently took the second swab, the one designated for the child, and carefully rubbed it against the inside of his soft cheek. He barely stirred. I sealed his sample, placed both vials into the prepaid tamper-proof envelope, and filled out the last of the paperwork. It was done. I drove straight to the post office and sent the package via certified mail, just like the instructions said. As I dropped the envelope into the slot, I felt a profound sense of finality. The truth was no longer in my hands. It was in the hands of science. The next 4 weeks were a special kind of torment. I was living a double life. On the outside, I was Landon Peterson, age 32, proud new father. I changed diapers. I handled the midnight feedings to let Jessica sleep. I pushed the stroller around the neighborhood, smiling at the other new parents. But on the inside, I was a ghost. I was a man waiting for a verdict on his own life. Every day was a performance. Every smile was a lie. Every time I said my son, the words felt like ash in my mouth. During this time, I watched Jessica and Mark Jennings like a hawk. And once you know what you're looking for, you see it everywhere. The way she'd laugh a little too loudly at his dumb jokes. The way his hand would linger on her arm for just a second too long when he came over, always under the guise of checking on the baby. He was over at our house constantly, our 33-year-old neighbor acting like he was part of the family. He'd bring over dinner, offer to mow the lawn, anything to have a reason to be there, to be near his son. They thought I was oblivious. They thought I was the happy, clueless husband, too wrapped up in the new baby to notice. They had no idea I was a prosecutor gathering evidence, watching them build the case against themselves with every shared glance and whispered conversation. The day the letter came, it was a Tuesday. It had been exactly 4 weeks since I mailed the samples. It arrived with the regular mail, but it wasn't a regular envelope. It was a large, stiff, certified mailer. It required a signature. The mailman handed it to me and my blood ran cold. My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. Jessica was in the shower. Leo was asleep in his crib. I had a few precious moments of privacy. I took the envelope into my home office and shut the door. My hands trembled so badly I could barely tear it open. Inside was a thick packet of paper bound in a professional-looking cover with the Veritas Legal Diagnostics logo. It was a notarized lab report. It looked official, final. I flipped past the legal jargon, the charts of genetic markers, my eyes scanning for the conclusion. And then I saw it. At the bottom of the page in bold black letters, a summary statement. Based on the analysis of the DNA profiles, the probability of paternity is 0.00%. 0.00. I read it again and again. The words didn't change. The numbers stayed the same. There was no ambiguity, no margin for error. It wasn't my son. He was not my son. I expected to feel rage. I expected to shatter. I expected to scream or cry or punch a hole in the wall. But I didn't. All the anxiety, the fear, the frantic uncertainty that had been eating me alive for weeks, it all just vanished. And in its place, a terrifying, cold, methodical calm settled over me. The war of uncertainty was over. The truth was here. Now it was time to plan the execution. I didn't confront her. That would be too easy. A quiet, messy, he said, she said fight behind closed doors wasn't what she deserved. She didn't deserve a private stage for her lies and crocodile tears. She and Mark had made a fool of me in private. I was going to expose them in public. I spent the next week meticulously planning. I told Jessica I wanted to throw a big party to belatedly celebrate Leo's birth and welcome him to the family properly. She loved the idea. She saw it as a chance to show off her perfect family, her perfect life. We invited everyone, my parents, her parents, all our aunts, uncles, cousins, all our mutual friends who had been congratulating me for months. And of course, I made a special point to personally invite our helpful neighbor, Mark Jennings. I told him, "You've been such a huge help, Mark. We'd be honored if you came." He beamed, promising he wouldn't miss it for the world. The day of the party, year 0 day 0, our house at 124 Willow Lane was packed. The backyard was full of laughter and music. People were cooing over 8-week-old Leo, telling me who he looked like. "He's got your smile, Landon," one friend said. I just smiled back, a hollow, brittle smile, and said, "You think so?" Jessica was in her element, the glowing new mother holding court, accepting compliments. Mark was there, drink in hand, playing the part of the friendly neighbor, never straying too far from Jessica and the baby. It was the perfect picture of domestic bliss, and it was all a lie. As the sun began to set, I clinked a glass with a spoon. "Everyone, can I have your attention, please?" The chatter died down. About 50 faces turned to look at me. Jessica was standing beside me, holding Leo, beaming with pride. She slipped her arm around my waist. I could feel her warmth, and it felt like ice. I started my speech. I thanked everyone for coming, for their gifts, for their love and support. I talked about what a journey it had been and how becoming a father had changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. I looked right at Jessica. "And to my beautiful wife, Jessica, you've given me the most incredible gift a man could ever ask for. You've taught me so much about love and truth." Her eyes welled up with tears. She thought it was a declaration of love. Mark was smiling, raising his glass to me from across the yard. And in the spirit of family and truth, I continued, my voice steady and clear. "I have one last gift to share with all of you. It's not for the baby exactly, it's more of a clarification. A few people chuckled confused. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a folded document. It was the notarized report from Veritas Legal Diagnostics. I unfolded it slowly. The crowd was silent now, a sense of unease creeping in. Jessica's smile faltered. "Landon, what is that?" she whispered. I ignored her. I held the paper up for everyone to see. "This is from a diagnostics lab," I announced. "I had some questions that needed answering, and I believe in getting definitive, legally admissible answers." I looked directly at Mark Jennings, whose face had gone pale. Then I looked back at the crowd. I read the final sentence aloud, my voice ringing out with cold, hard clarity in the sudden dead silence of the backyard. The conclusion states, the alleged father, Landon Peterson, is excluded as the biological father of the child, Leo, as the genetic markers required for paternity are not present. The probability of paternity is 0.00%. You could have heard a pin drop on the grass. 50 faces stared, mouths agape, caught between disbelief and horror. Then a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Jessica's face crumbled. The color drained from it completely. "Landon, no. It's a mistake. That's not real," she stammered, her voice cracking. "Oh, it's real, Jessica," I said calmly, holding up the document with its official seal and notary stamp. "It's a legally binding, court-admissible document. There is no mistake." All eyes in the yard swiveled from her to Mark Jennings. He was frozen, a statue of humiliation, his drink still clutched in his hand. He looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. My mother started crying. Jessica's father just stared at her, his face a mask of stone-cold fury. The lie was dead. The perfect family she had built was a pile of ashes at her feet, incinerated in front of everyone she knew. The functional basis of our marriage, the claim of my paternity, it all terminated in that exact moment. The chaos erupted. People started whispering, shouting. Jessica was sobbing, still trying to deny it, but her words were meaningless against the black and white truth I held in my hand. I let the chaos swirl for a moment, letting them both stew in the public humiliation they had earned. Then I lowered my voice, but it cut through the noise like a razor. I looked at Jessica, then at Mark. "The party's over," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "Get out of my house." Jessica just stared at me broken. Mark, without a single word, turned and practically ran out of the backyard, disappearing into the night. Jessica's mother came and took the crying baby from her arms. Her father grabbed her by the elbow and began pulling her toward the gate, and just like that, they were gone. My friends and family slowly filtered out, offering quiet, awkward words of support, leaving me alone in the wreckage. The yard was a mess of empty cups and half-eaten food, a perfect metaphor for my life. But standing there in the quiet aftermath, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. The crushing weight of the deception was gone. The victory wasn't joyful. There was no elation, but it was a victory nonetheless. It was the reclamation of my life. I now held the undeniable critical evidence I needed to file for divorce. I had the legal proof to have my name removed from that birth certificate, severing the fraudulent tie forever. The biological, financial, and moral responsibility for Leo now rested squarely where it belonged, with Mark Jennings. I had been lied to, betrayed, and humiliated. But I refused to be a victim. I took control. I sought the truth, and I used that truth to surgically remove the cancer from my life on my own terms, in front of the very people they had lied to. My future was now a blank page, and for the first time in a long time, I was the one holding the pen.